Every problem in life can be boiled down to a relationship problem. How's your sex life? How's your relationships at work, with your parents, friends? This episode is sponsored by the Truism Centered Life's 30-Day Relationship Challenge. Check it out at truismcenteredlife.com. Rob's 30-Day Relationship Challenge is designed to help you feel more connected to those around you. It's a 30-day journey of self-discovery using resilience training and relationship psychology to help you feel stronger and happier with the relationships in your life. Welcome to Season 5 of the Color Success Podcast, where we talk with guests from AAPI and ethnic minority communities and have real discussions about mental health and what success looks like. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie J. Wong. Before we get into it, remember to subscribe to our mailing list for free at colorsuccesspodcast.com so you don't miss any updates. There, you will find our socials, YouTube channel, and all episodes on streaming platforms for great additional content. Today, I have a very special guest that I've wanted to invite on the show for a very long time. His name is Matt Ogawa, and he is a vice president of HR Business Partners at Meta Inc., where his team focuses on organizational design, talent management, and leadership coaching. Additionally, Matt is involved in many facets of the larger Asian Pacific Islander community and is the executive advisor for the Meta API resource group. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today on your Friday.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be here and to have this conversation.
Absolutely. So what is so wonderful about you is you're so involved in the community. You've planned a forum with the Nam Brothers on mental health. You've done and organized the API celebrity basketball game, and you took a second sabbatical at Meta. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that's energized you physically and mentally?
Yeah, absolutely. I took a sabbatical last year, which is actually a sabbatical that employees are given after working 5 years with the company. And I knew it was coming. I really needed it. And the bummer was I had to push it out for 2 years. Well, I didn't have to, but I chose to push it out for 2 years because of COVID and didn't really want to take a sabbatical when everything was closed or shut down. Um, I think it's something, and, coming from an Asian background, I am fourth generation Asian American, but
Okay.
there is still this work ethic that I think is ingrained in us. And being able to step away from work is it's a very vulnerable thing, and it's hard to do. Even taking vacation or PTO is hard to do. Um, but I think taking such an extended amount of time off is something which I'll touch on in a second. Is something that I learned earlier in my career was actually something that would be really good for me, even if I didn't realize it. And so I was out for about just under 7 weeks. And in that time, unlike others do, I did not travel the world. I did not, you know, have a big project that I was going to work on. I decided that I was going to, yes, incorporate maybe some small trips here and there, but really focus on things around health and well-being. So whether it's going on more bike rides, going on hikes, sleeping in, things like that, those were the things I really wanted to do. And for the first couple of weeks, it's still a scary thing because you're thinking in your head, what about all this, I need to do this for work, or who's going to take care of XYZ? And I quickly realized by, I think it was week 3, the clarity that started to form in my head was just great. And coming back from the sabbatical, I was kind of taking notes about my experience. And couple of the things I realized are the time away from the office provided me such clarity. So things that were a big deal and stressing me out and keeping me up at night weren't that big of a deal anymore, either because you realize that they end up working themselves out, or you realize that it's just not that big of a deal, even though it might seem that way in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I came back with a renewed sense of being able to prioritize things in my own head. So the week leading up to my sabbatical, I think there were probably 50 things that were a priority. And then coming back from it, I could look at that same list that I walked away from saying, no, this is the priority, and these things can sort of be deprioritized, for lack of a better word. And having that clarity is something that I hadn't realized was going to hit me the way that it did. But if I can touch on something very earlier in my career, about 15 years ago, I was working in a job that I liked the people I worked with, I liked the company I was at, but I did not like the job yet, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't like the job, and I hadn't yet realized that it was the impact that it was having on me. It was more of a data analytics type role. It was a lot of spreadsheets and numbers, which is not who I am, not what I majored
You
in.
are a people person. Like I could just
Exactly.
tell from talking with you. Like, I mean, data is very important, and I'm sure that's helped you in your job in presentations, but there's that human element that is
Yeah,
just so rewarding.
absolutely. You're 100% right. And the way that was showing up in my job was because you really want to do good work in your job, and you want to get promoted and get raises and all those types of
Sure.
things. But what was happening was is I started getting these bouts of feeling sick. Like I
Mm,
was either had the flu, or there was one major time where I actually felt as though I was having a heart attack. At the
like a
age of
like a
like
panic
30.
attack.
Yeah, but I didn't know what it was at the time.
Right.
And then after going to therapy, and then later on taking a 2 month sabbatical away from work, I realized I was having panic attacks because there was all this pressure I was putting on myself. There was stuff that I wasn't able to unpack because I didn't know what I didn't know. I was at a job I didn't like, and it was causing me a huge amount of stress. And all of that was sort of building up to show up physically, not, there was mental health, but also physically in how I was. And it was like going to doctor's appointments time and time again, or even urgent
Mm,
care or emergency visits, and them saying, "You're physically completely fine. I think you're having a panic attack." But what I learned from these two experiences is, cutting myself some slack and giving myself the ability to step away and not have to worry about all the things that I might need to solve in my job. That the company will do okay if I take some time away to any company will do okay if I take some time to
yes.
take care of myself. Um, and I'll kind of tie it up with a statement that has always rung true with me is, when you're on an airplane and they tell you when the air mask drops down, make sure that you put the air mask on
Hmm.
yourself before you start helping other people, which, when I was younger, I was like, what? You're going to help yourself before your own
Yeah. So
children? Or
selfish.
exactly, right? But you learn that you can't effectively help others unless you're taking care of yourself first. And so that has been a mantra that has rung true for me throughout now my entire career and even today.
Absolutely. And the thing that you touched upon a couple of things that are so important. One is that, I mean, 15 years ago, I think things have changed where medical doctors are learning more that of what panic attacks are and what are the appropriate or clinically indicated referrals. But many times people will just send you off at the ER and say, this a long time ago, you're fine physically, go home. And like, you
Yeah.
know, everything's all good, you're okay. And the other thing that you mentioned was going to therapy. I think just saying that is so wonderful because hearing an Asian American male say that aloud, give voice to that this is something that's a part of daily life. And the third thing is that self-care piece and what that looks like, because you described not having sabbatical letdown. And what I mean by that is usually when we come back from vacation, everyone's like, like they say they have like vacation depression, like post-vacation depression. And it sounds like you didn't experience that when you came back from a sabbatical. So, I mean, that's just fantastic.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's one of those things where I don't know if ever in your career you've taken a sabbatical or time off, but before you go on it, you start dreading in your head like, oh, at some point I'm going to have to come back to this, and that the days leading up to it is going to be so stressful. I actually didn't experience that either time. Of course, we would all like to, continue our time off, whether
Sure.
it's a sabbatical or like a mental health leave. But coming back into something with a lot of clarity, having completely shut off, is actually a really powerful
That's a good question because a lot of times people still have their email on. I've seen, excuse me, champions of like these out of office emails and stuff, which are going around. But how do you completely shut off? Because
Mhm.
you may not be worried, but some people still have those pings on because it's almost like a drug that we have all those alerts on, right?
Yeah, you're 100% right. In my most recent situation, so I have two phones. I have my work phone and I have my
Sure,
personal phone. And I had given my assistant, she knows how to get a hold of me in an emergency situation,
sure.
but I actually left my work phone at work. So I didn't have it with me because you're right. It's so easy to just not even realize you're picking up your phone and
Hmm.
thumbing through emails or text or whatever. So I made it hard for myself to do that with work emails because on my personal phone, I don't have any work apps or access to anything. And as it turned out, I didn't receive any calls or texts, in a sort of emergency situation. So it took some getting used to,
Yes.
and some uncomfort. But the more you push yourself through it. Like I said, by week 3, I wasn't even thinking about it anymore. I was sort of into, what am I doing for myself type of a thing.
Well, that's interesting. I also have a work phone, and in the past, it used to be before the big tech boom, right? It was like drug dealers were the only ones with two phones.
Yeah, exactly.
But one thing that I always say, because I do take international vacations, and who's covering for me? I always have coverage for my patients, but I'm like, I am out of the country. This phone is shut down. Like, you're not going to get a response. This is who you need to reach out to. And I really encourage my patients too that really define for yourself what is a true emergency.
Mhm.
I learned from one of the chiefs at work of like, hey, my job is to make sure no one is trying to kill themselves and they're not relapsing to the point where they're trying to hurt self or others. And so when I heard that, I was like, wow, how are people defining emergencies? Because most people don't face that in their day-to-day jobs in
Mhm.
tech. So
Right.
that define it for yourselves, people. Really, what
Mhm.
is an emergency?
Yeah, and I've seen it's kind of becoming a thing now where people will actually write in their out of office message, don't reach out to me unless this is absolutely urgent. And when I say urgent, I mean, rarely is something actually urgent.
Sure.
So to really stop and think about that. But I think it's good to normalize. The other thing is I was very explicit with my first lead and then this recent sabbatical that I was going to be out for an extended amount of time. And I'm also starting, as we start to normalize the conversation around mental health, I actually feel like people in many industries are actually giving grace to that and respecting.
Yes.
I remember Matt saying he's going to be out, so I'm not going to reach out for this, and I'll find another way to handle it. And I'm starting to see more of that, which is actually really great to see.
I think we should both put, unless you are BTS,
Exactly.
please. um,
Exactly.
but after going through these experiences, what has your conceptualization of what it looks like to be mentally healthy changed?
Absolutely. Actually, when I was right out of college and in my first job, I didn't really know what mental health. I mean, I knew by definition what it meant, but I didn't
Hmm.
really know what it meant for me. And I think especially too, growing up the way that we've grown up, it's mental health isn't something that's really talked about a lot. And
Yes.
well, one, asking for help is just not easy, no matter what. But two, our parents, our grandparents, our aunts and uncles, they didn't go to therapy. It was just you dealt with it and
It's a
you managed it.
privilege.
Exactly. And it's almost as if you go to therapy, it's like complaining in a way,
Yeah.
or oh, you're whining about your problems, but it's not that at all because and the first time I went to therapy, I'm like, oh gosh, is it going to be someone like telling me this is who I am and this is what I think about you? But what I quickly learned about that and how it relates to mental health is it is about this discovery of how does my therapist help me have some self realizations. So it's really about me discovering my own things or diagnosing myself rather than someone else telling me this is what's wrong with you or this is what's right with you, and then being able to use the language and self-identify. Uh-oh, I'm at a point right now where I actually need a break, or uh-oh, I'm at a point right now where I need to ask for help, and then giving me the tools to be able to know how to ask for help and how to know when I need a break. Those are all things that were so foreign to me before, but now I would say are completely normal.
Well, I'm
And
glad you described that process
yeah.
because that is what therapy is about, in my perspective, of really
Mhm.
having a collaborative conversation and
Yeah.
not judging someone for their choices or behavior. A lot of times, and I teach my kids this, it's not, you're not a bad person. It's that you may have some problematic behaviors and
Yeah.
you're not identifying that as someone's as your personhood or your identity. And so um the other thing that kind of came up when you were talking about that is, despite not wanting to complain, old school generations, including when my grandma was alive, was like talking about ailments all the time. There was always
Mhm.
something wrong, and it could possibly be, but many of the times it was psychological. And so even though there's this stigma around going to therapy,
Mhm.
within the day to day, there's always these ailments like, oh, I might have a cough, or I mean, in COVID time, that's probably the case, but oh, I might have a cough, my back, like these things
Yeah.
like that, right? And so there's a forum here for people to really talk about that and normalize it, just as we would go to the dentist. We
Yep.
have our mental health to take care of. And like we talked about, generational trauma is a huge aspect of what our generations are dealing with. But it was a luxury because you really had to survive as an
Mhm.
immigrant to put food on the table, to have shelter. And now we have this opportunity to really break some of that cycle.
Mhm. Yeah, you, you're so right. And again, like I don't think I would have known how to have this discussion, 15 years ago. And I think the other thing too is, especially for those, I mean, as I said earlier, I'm fourth generation Asian American, but I know especially for those that are first or second generation,
Yeah.
and maybe have immigrant parents, I can imagine, what I hear is it's even tougher for them, right? Because
Yeah.
they're not able to relate even more distantly than I am. So yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to hear you talk through this as someone who sits on the other side.
Mhm.
The other thing I learned too, which is interesting, is it seems daunting, right? I think a lot of people can probably self-identify. Oh, I probably could benefit from going to seek therapy, but it's daunting, right? Because I need to find out if it's the right therapist, because it's sort of like dating in a way, right? Like
It
you want to
is.
find the
It's
right
yeah,
therapist.
exactly. Well, I say, like, when you're trying to choose you don't have to do this, but your OBGYN, it's like you want to be very honest with that person, but if you feel uncomfortable with a certain provider, like it's not a good fit. So why would you want to tell your deepest, darkest thoughts? And it's not always dark, but your thoughts to someone you don't really vibe with.
Exactly, exactly, and that makes all the difference. And I've met a lot of folks too who have sought therapy and didn't vibe with a person, and then figured, oh, I'm not going to go back because it was a bad experience. But the first therapist I had, she was amazing. She's since retired, but it took me four different therapists before I got to her, and it was yeah, you just know when it clicks, and then you feel like you can be much more open and vulnerable. But then you learn how to be like that with other people too, not just your
Yes.
therapist. And I think that's also a huge benefit in seeking therapy.
It's a starting point, and I
Hmm.
think I always encourage people, even when they call, to see if we're a good fit. I'm like, hey, shop around,
Yeah.
because you don't want to trap someone in a professional relationship, and they're not feeling it and they don't know what else is out there. And typically, like, they do come back and be like, yeah, I tried people and this seems like the best fit, but it may not be, right? And I think the other thing is, it doesn't necessarily have to be an AAPI provider.
Right.
However, for people that are seeking therapy, there is some comfort in seeing
Hmm.
yourself reflected in the therapy room. And you're absolutely right in terms of a therapeutic relationship is a way for you to test out social skills, to test out building intimate relationships, and then extrapolating that to your personal life and
Yeah.
work life.
Oh, totally. I actually have a funny story of a therapist who I'd gone to. I think this was number two or three. So not someone I ultimately ended up sticking with, but in our, first introductory meeting where she was doing an intake. She's not Asian. She is not Asian. But what she said to me sort of turned me off to seeking her. She said, "I'm not Asian, and I know that it'd probably be more comfortable for you if I were. So actually, in a past life, I was an Asian woman, and I lived." And she had this whole like she lived in 1800.
Story.
Yeah, this whole, and I was like, "Oh gosh." But you're right. I mean, all kidding aside, I think once I was able to find someone that I did vibe with, it made the world of difference because I think it is not comfortable for some like myself, as I said, to ask for help or
Hmm.
to be someone who would just share my feelings with just anybody. And even once I found a therapist that I worked really well with, it takes even a couple sessions before you feel like the floodgates can open and you let it all out there.
Yeah, to your story, I'm like, is this reborn rich? What is this going on? But I think that's the other thing too, is that a lot of times we're evaluating cultural competency too,
Mhm.
and anti-racist attitudes. And I mean, that's a highlight or a situation where that is probably not the best thing to say to an AAPI potential client. So I'm putting it out there for my colleagues, and really thinking about how can we improve our cultural awareness, because it's not just about like reading books or watching movies about people that look like us. There's actually this
Lived
as
experience, yeah.
exactly. And you don't have to be Asian American, but at least being able to understand what would be appropriate in what context would probably be really, really helpful. So transitioning a little bit, because you're a huge advocate in the API community, you were an unsung hero in the Asian Hustle Network in 2021 in the inaugural year. And so how do you feel people can really support our communities and get involved?
Yeah, I mean, I get this question a lot, and I always ask people what they want to get out of it because it's not that people don't want to get involved. I think
Mhm.
people do, and when I say get involved, I think it always has to be money, donating money somewhere, or volunteering actual hours.
Mhm.
And it could be that, but I think it's so much more than that. And I think it's really being able to define for yourself what is it that I want to give back. Maybe it's a skill that you have that you can impart on a group of people. Maybe it's a passion that you have that's separate from your job, that you can lend and help and you want, or even like a skill that you're trying to build at work. So I always ask people, what is it that you want to get out of it, or what is it that you want to give? Because there are a lot of different ways to give back and get involved. And then I think it's helping them really define what that is, because sometimes people don't know, right?
Yeah.
And so I like to have conversations and tell them just try stuff out. I think there's a lot of need out there, and the reason why I think it's important for AAPIs to support other AAPIs is because what you and I were talking about earlier. A lot of times people don't know how to ask for help, and so sometimes you need to proactively go out there and say,
And offer.
yeah, I have this thing that I want to do. Who would like to take part in it? Or is there anyone out there that would like to learn from an industry expert because I do XYZ to do XYZ, whatever it is. And usually, once you put yourself out there, then I think people start to flock towards that. So I always tell people define what it is that you want to get out of it and what you want to put out there, and then do it. Just put yourself out there. And even if you help one person, it doesn't have to be a whole business or a whole nonprofit or whatever. If you can help one person, that
Oh
is
yeah.
actually giving back.
Well, we can use any free volunteers over here because we're continuing to grow. So it's been really exciting. And as you can imagine, tackling Asian American mental health is a big thing. So
Yeah, huge.
yeah. Every problem in life can be boiled down to a relationship problem. How's your sex life? How's your relationships at work, with your parents, friends? This episode is sponsored by the Truism Centered Life's 30-day relationship challenge. Check it out at truismcenteredlife.com. Rob's 30-day relationship challenge is designed to help you feel more connected to those around you. It's a 30-day journey of self-discovery, using resilience training and relationship psychology to help you feel stronger and happier with the relationships in your life. Well, transitioning a little bit because I mean, we're both in the Bay Area and we saw a lot of layoffs in the tech industry towards the end of last year. And, one thing that I was really wondering from an expert is how can people do that in the most humane way where we are really considering people's mental health in the
Mhm.
process?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough, right? When you're sitting in a big company, whether it be a large company or a small
Sure.
company, at the bottom line of things is that the company has to make money, or else you won't have any employees at all. I always say that it's best when one, a company is very transparent about the reasons why it's happening, because I've been part of layoffs before. I've had to work through a lot of layoffs just sitting in HR. And a lot of times it's a very personal thing, right? People think,
Absolutely.
did I do something wrong? Am I not valued? Am I not? And that's really not the case. And so I think when you hear and you can sort of anchor your feelings on the reasons why a layoff has to occur, then that can help. I think when a company is very upfront about even resources they might have for employees, whether they're going through a reduction in force or not, around mental health resources, whether it's
Yes.
different modules they have, whether it's you and I earlier were talking about Lyra, which is a company that a lot of companies use to support mental health, or even articles or writing that people can read up on just to learn more. Knowing what those resources are, I mean, I've talked to so many friends that are like, "Oh yeah, my company doesn't really have mental health resources," but I actually know that they do. They just didn't know about it. So I think making clear what those are, and then I think giving people the time to process. There's there's not a way, in my opinion, to make a layoff a good thing, because there's loss involved, right? You're losing
It
coworkers.
sucks.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I think giving people the time to work through it and process it, as something that is a huge life experience for some that might be going through for the first time. And so I think whenever a company can give people that time to process, to work through it, to understand, the reasons why, and the resources there, is, I think, the most humane way to do it. But it's, as I said, that doesn't mean it makes it easier for everyone. It doesn't mean that it's ever going to be a positive experience, because it's just a tough thing.
Well, I think you brought up a really good point about grief because a lot of people look at the financial impact and on the family, but like you said, there is a loss. A lot of people identify with their profession and their
Hmm.
career and maybe very accomplished, quote unquote. And
Hmm.
also, you build relationships with people that you work with. It's your work family. I mean, we tend to spend more time at work than we do at home. I mean,
Hmm.
now a lot of people work from home, so they live here.
Yeah.
But I think that's a very important point is to give yourself that space to grieve and understand. But what I've been really impressed with a lot of people is they look at it like an opportunity, right?
Mhm.
Of like, I've been wanting to quit a long time. And like this
Yeah.
is really giving me that springboard to really say, what are my values and where do I want to focus my attention now?
Hmm. Yeah, I do think there's a lot of people out there where, look, a job is a means to an end, right? It's literally a way to earn a paycheck, and that's what it is. But for the other people, where, like you said, people spend so many of their waking hours in a job and a career, and sometimes it's their passion and they love what they do. And then we're working through that grief is good to just be in touch with that. But
Absolutely.
I also think for people like us that do identify as AAPI, the big thing, and I just have to put an underscore to it, is realizing that it's often not that you did something wrong or anything personal
And you're
against
not a
you,
failure.
and you're not a failure. And I think the other tough thing too, quite honestly, is how do people have that conversation with their family or friends out there, because a lot of people don't understand what a layoff, especially if I'm an immigrant um, elder. I don't understand what a layoff is. I might see it as, oh, you got fired because you did something
Hmm.
wrong, which is not always the case. So I always like to try to get people to really think through that, and know the difference so they can help explain to their family or friends or whatever
Yeah.
what the situation actually is.
Well, what kind of language would you recommend them saying? Because I imagine that that conversation is just so hard.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard as one example, oftentimes I'll hear a friend that's been laid off, and they'll say, "I was just fired," and immediately I'm like, "Fired? What happened?" And they're like, "Well, the company was doing layoffs," and I was like, "Oh, you were laid off. You weren't
Right.
fired." And the difference is when your role is eliminated, it means that it could mean a lot of things, right? It could mean that the company doesn't need that role anymore because that that thing was deprecated, it's no longer happening. It could mean that I'm making it up. There might be like 100 people doing the same thing, and you don't need that many people doing that anymore. So it's literally cut in
Or
half, and
leadership changes.
leadership changes, anything. Exactly. Whereas when I hear fired, it means that you're failure to perform, you violated policy, you did something wrong, right? And those aren't always and often are not the same thing. So I like to make sure that people are using the right language.
Yeah, and explaining that to parents and your
Hmm.
family, right, is that there's a difference between those two. I know it becomes challenging because if you're not really communicating that in English, there may not be words and that
Exactly.
differentiation between those kind of explanations or terms. But trying your best, as you said, to differentiate that one maybe more so that there was some issue or performance issue versus the other, which is very external,
Yeah.
and not take it personally.
Yeah, and I've had friends too, and I'm not a parent, but what I also tell people is, sometimes when parents get angry, it's more they're worried about you, right?
Oh,
They're
yeah.
scared, and so sometimes it's not actual anger, but it's them trying to like work through and process their own feelings about something because they care about you as their child. And so sometimes the anger comes out of care, which is such a strange thing,
I know,
but
and a huge cultural piece, right? But I think
exactly.
part of it is like they begin to question themselves, like, what did I do as a parent? Where did I go wrong? And all those things. I mean, my kids are younger and they're not of working age, and of course, like I think one of the cultural pieces is that we'll always be there for them, and if
Yeah.
they need to have shelter or food or money or anything like that, that would be part of what we would take care of, which isn't the case in all families. But I think ultimately, as my kids grow, it's like really you do want to make sure that they can take care of themselves when you're gone. And so
Hmm.
that's a huge shock to parents when they're like, oh, I thought that you were stable and you were okay. And now like it is scary, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Oh, completely. And laws are different here than they are in a lot of Asian countries, and so
Yes.
things that happen here will never or have never happened in other countries. And so sometimes it's such a foreign thing that they're like, "Wait, what happened? You lost your job?" That. Yeah.
So, I saw a recent post that you put up, which it was fantastic, of a lot of people are now applying for different roles and wondering what your thoughts are on standing out as a candidate and maybe some things to say and other things that you maybe shouldn't say on your interview.
Totally. I know exactly which post you're talking about.
Yes.
One that I did on LinkedIn. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of people out there interviewing for jobs right now, as you said, and I think there's what I'm hearing is as much as some people may be in disbelief, is a lot of people are jumping into interviews and not saying the questions are wrong, but when you lead with things like how much vacation do I get, can I work from home, what other perks and benefits are there, what's my salary going to be, and you like start negotiating salary before you've even had like your finished your first round of interviews. um, I think that's actually pretty common out in the workforce, and so
Mm,
what I like to try to tell people is take the mindset less about what can the company do for you and more about what you actually bring. Like, don't forget to sell what you are bringing to the table to make someone actually want to hire you, and then you can have all those conversations about all the other
yes.
stuff. Because I think that does make people stand out. And I know right now one of the things as people have been reaching out to me, I've been saying, I recently lost my job and I'm not sure how to make myself stand out. It's too late for me to like get another certification or for me to add this X experience to my resume. But I always say, well, it's then how you show up. It's how you conduct yourself. And think about a hiring manager right now who's probably being reached out to by maybe hundreds of people.
Yes.
The ones that they're going to lean more towards are the people that are, upfront and honest, but also you're showing me that you're an asset. You're going to be an asset to me, not that I'm going to have to spend my time worrying about how to take care of you when I don't even know what you bring to the table yet.
And I haven't interviewed others for quite a long time because our team has been pretty solid. I think last was like 3 years ago, which is
Hmm.
great. Like the only time we lose someone is when they retire.
Yeah.
But one of the big things that I look for too is, are you coachable?
Hmm.
Because we can teach you all these technical skills, but if we can't talk to you, that's a huge no-no for me.
Yeah.
And so part of that, what you're talking about, is those soft skills that people would need to demonstrate in an interview. Because if in the interview you're already looking like I'm out for myself, that's really tough. And I also wanted to ask, do you see, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but do you see that as a generational thing? Because when I was interviewing, and I, I'm a dinosaur comparatively to some of these kids. It would always be that I
Yeah.
would always lead with like what I like about the company and what I can offer. And so, do you see this shift over the many years that you've been doing this?
Yes and no. I mean, honestly, I see this happen at all generations, but I do see it a lot in younger generations, and there's also this thing about, and I don't know if other people can see through it, but you also have to show up as being genuine, right?
Yes.
What I love is when, I'm not in recruiting, but I do interview folks a lot, and what I love is when I can tell that the candidate loves the company that we work
Hmm.
for, and I can genuinely tell that they believe in the mission and they want to work there. Less impressive when they're reciting taglines off of like company website. It's like, okay, so you read the website, but you're not really clear on like what we're trying to do here. That's a big one. But I want to kind of go back to what you said. I love what you said about being coachable, because the other thing I think that folks can do to make themselves stand out right now, which again is a really tough thing for a lot of us AAPIs, is talking about some of your failures. And I know that's actually a question that will get asked in interviews from time to time.
Hmm.
And I think there's a way, like I've had, candidates or friends that I've talked to say, oh yeah, I totally screwed that up. And yeah, it was a big mess. And then like, period, and it ends. But, stand out by saying what you learned from that and how you never let that happen again, or how did you fix or mitigate it in the
Hmm.
moment. So people can see, one, you're aware of your failures, you're aware of what didn't go well, you had a plan, you're able to kind of fix things and pivot in the moment, and then you have the awareness to kind of be able to um, describe that to me and talk about it openly, is a really powerful thing, and something that I know is not always easy for AAPIs, but I think it makes a huge difference.
Well, recently I saw that interview with Oprah and Quinta Brunson, and they both said something very interesting. They're like, I don't believe that a failure is a failure. I
Yeah.
see it as redirection. And
Hmm.
so I think really framing that for folks of like, what did I learn from this situation? How did it help me, like you said, pivot? And I hear the Ross voice from Friends when I always hear that word, pivot. But I think that that's a very there's so many valuable lessons that we get from taking calculated risk and then it not working out the way that we um, necessarily initially wanted. So I think that's just such great advice, and not really taught in a classroom.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, because what we're taught is always be right, always have the right answer, don't ever mess up. And I always say, screw that. Like it's fine, it's okay, as long as you know how to work yourself out of it, or know where to go to get the help to do so. That's what's more important to me than being risk adverse and never wanting to do anything because you're afraid it's gonna, go sideways.
and not giving that canned answer of like I work too much, because now that would give me a red flag to say you may
Exactly.
not be able to know, you may not know how to take care of yourself
Exactly.
in a mental health way.
Exactly. And there's, the whole adage of working smarter is not always working hard. I mean, working harder is not always working smarter. And I know a lot of people are looking for the people that work smart, not necessarily hard using air quotes because long hours and working late into the night does not mean that the work product is good.
It's so true. It's so
Yeah.
true. So, now that you've had this extensive career, how do you define success for yourself at this point in your life?
Oh, that is a really good question. I think ultimately, what I want to be doing when I grow up is such a funny thing. Is I still want to be doing something for others. One of the reasons why it's been important. So I'm Japanese American, and one of the important things is, a lot of my friends that are Japanese American always say, "Why do you work in corporate America?" Because typically you don't see a lot of Japanese Americans in corporate America in leadership roles. Um, and people tell me, "You just seem so community minded. I would think I would see you at some nonprofit or something like that," and I would love that. But I also think that there's a place at the table for someone or people like myself that think the way I do, that represent our way of thinking, our culture, our heritage, that can be integrated into leadership teams at different companies. And not only my reason for wanting to work at larger companies is not only to gain experience for myself, but it's because I think that it's important that our point of view be at the table and be in some of the rooms where big decisions are being made. Um,
110% agree with that. And thank you so much for doing that, because when people are thinking about quitting these companies, I always ask them, can you make a difference on the inside for people,
Yeah, exactly, 100%. And in terms of, down the road, I don't know. I want to continue to be in service to the AAPI community for sure. I love when I can help people or help unlock things for people that maybe they don't realize about themselves. And so it will be something in this realm. I don't know if I'll always be in this arm of HR, but I've also done learning and development. I've done recruiting. I've done a lot of things within the HR realm. And as I said before, I've also done numbers, business analytics, and I've done nonprofit too. So we'll see. But I think now, whereas before it was, how do you make money and how do you be financially secure, which is still important to me. But more now you learn as I think you get older, and you would probably agree with me, is that time is precious and
Yes.
life is short. So now I lean towards like, how am I going to be happy and feel that fulfillment out of what I do every day? And that's sort of my North Star now.
Purpose.
Yeah, purpose. Oh, 100%.
Yeah, and you have an ally here now, and I think there's just so much change, and being in leadership is not always comfortable,
Mm-mm.
and also intersecting with our cultural values or the way that we've been brought up. I am not the stereotypical quiet Asian American woman, and sometimes like people push back on that because they expect me to just put my head down and follow XYZ. And
Yeah.
I think that you have to gain more comfort with being uncomfortable. And
Hmm.
I'm not advocating everyone do that, because it does take a lot of coping skills and some thick skin. And so, but I agree with you in terms of having that seat at the table, figuring out how we can help the community given our positions. And again, we are in positions of privilege. I don't
Hmm.
discount that. But it has taken us quite a few years to get to that point. And so you can start very small. And I think going back to what you were saying before of like, you have things to offer. You can get involved and talk about mental health, and um, even if it's with a friend,
Hmm.
and saying how it's been helpful for you to look at this. Like that's why I love the podcast, because you can send a link to someone, they can listen to it in the privacy of their own space or when they're walking, and they don't have to be judged for hearing some of these conversations.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100% agree.
So, of course, people will want to know, where can they connect with you? Where can they look at all these fun posts that you're putting out here? Because these are gold nuggets, guys.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. I'm on LinkedIn. I try to post there now and then. I don't actually check my messages as often there. I'm also on Instagram. I have to put that plug out there because it's my company. And so I'm at Ogawa Matt, which is just my last name and then my first name. And I love when people reach out to me on there. I love getting to know folks. I love hearing their stories. And if they, if there's any time that people want partnership on something, I'm totally open and down for that.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, thank you so much. I'm so glad to find another army. And also you just seem, like I said, a people person, and you are in the right line of work and helping our community. So thank you so much for connecting with me today.
No, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to chat.
Thank you for tuning in. Remember to support us for free by subscribing to our mailing list at colorsuccesspodcast.com. There, you will find our socials, YouTube channel, and all episodes on streaming platforms for great additional content. As Rob Heaps from Partner Track said, success is contagious, so come catch it.